You're listening to Winnipeg's Classic 107. My name is Simon Rusnak. This weekend, the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra opens their 75th anniversary season with a gala concert welcoming back one of Manitoba's own classical superstar, James Ehnes. The Brandon-born violinist has become one of the world's most sought-after players, performing in over 35 countries on 5 continents, appearing regularly in the world's great concert halls and with many of the most celebrated orchestras and conductors. Performing Beethoven's beloved violin concerto alongside the WSO and Maestro Daniel Reiskin on Saturday evening, James Ehnes has first joined me virtually to chat about the show. Welcome back to Winnipeg's Classic 107. Lovely to see you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, thanks for having me on.
You've joined us virtually from your home in Florida, but I'm nonetheless also going to offer you a premature welcome back to Winnipeg. You must be so excited.
Yeah, it's been far too long. I was last in Manitoba in the summer of 2019, and that was, a lifetime ago, right? The world's a different place now. So I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and it will be just great to catch up with old friends, old places. Yeah, I'm really really looking forward to it.
Well, let's chat a little bit more about that. It's always a big deal when you come to this part of the world and when you make your way back home, and you inevitably hear these whispers. It's you go to a concert and someone says, "Hey, did you hear James Ennis is coming back to town? Did you hear he's coming back?" There's this buzz, and I think that comes from the pride we Manitobans have for our own. What about for you? Tell us a little bit more about how it feels to be coming back, especially after the past few years.
Well, I mean, that's very kind. There's been a lot of years of building up a relationship, a rapport with the musicians in the city and the audience. And I think
Mm.
that that's something that is equally special on both sides. Yeah, it's harder for me to get back to Manitoba now because I live far away. Of course, there were travel restrictions, and I don't have family there anymore. I've
Mm.
got a lot of friends that feel kind of like family, but I think it's going to be for me on a personal level, kind of emotional seeing people again. And I wish the trip weren't quite as busy as it is, but that's my fault. I kind of built in a bit of a busy schedule. No, it's going to be great. And I think that celebrating the history, the 75th anniversary of the WSO. I mean, this is an orchestra that has meant so much to me. It's the orchestra I grew up with. And it's funny, as I remember when I first started playing with the WSO. I mean, which was almost 35 years ago at this point, it seemed like, this institution that had been around forever. And it's funny to think that that history has almost doubled in the years that
Mm.
I've known it.
Yeah, it really is such a wonderful organization. And like you say, you've grown with that organization. And I do want to talk more about that. But just to catch listeners up in case they aren't aware, I'll give you a very short, brief rundown of your resume. You were born in Brandon, your father, a longtime trumpet prophet, BU, your mother, a former ballet dancer who ran a dance school that I think was a satellite school of the RWB back in the
It
day,
started
right?
that way. Yeah, it
Yeah, yeah,
started that
yeah. Then you came under the tutelage of Francis Chaplin, Dr. Francis Chaplin, who shaped so many violinists' careers in Canada before studies at Meadowmount and then Juilliard with Sally Thomas. Your career filled with accolades, awards, Grammys, a gramophone, Junos, numerous prizes and other honors, fellow of the Royal Society of Canada and a member of the Order of Canada. All of that to say, and I know that you've answered this question before, but I just want to circle back around to it. Why the violin ahead of all
way.
of that? What made you pick it up that led you to this sterling career?
I don't have an answer. It's I think kids tend to get involved in the things they see around them, and for me,
Yeah.
that was music and the arts. But as far as why the violin, I think I heard it, in my parents' record collection. I heard all the instruments of the orchestra, I guess. But I think I do have some early memories of seeing people play the violin, seeing Itzhak Perlman play on Sesame Street, and thinking he was awesome, things like that. But I don't know. I feel really lucky that I knew what I could identify something that I wanted to do, and that I had a support network in place to allow me to pursue it. A lot
Mhm.
of things had to go very right for me, and they did. So I'm very, very grateful for that.
You mentioned Itzhak Perlman being on Sesame Street. You're not the first world-renowned violinist I've talked to that has mentioned that performance. It's incredible how many lives Sesame Street has shaped, isn't
Yeah,
it? It really
yeah,
is
yeah. That's
impressive.
for sure.
One of the other things that I do want to spend a bit of time focusing on in this conversation is the past. Not too long, but I mean, I do want to speak a little bit more about it, especially with the rather recent and untimely passing of Maestro Bramwell Tovey. I mean, he was such a force in the classical music scene, especially here in Canada. Just such a wonderful ambassador, an engaging presenter, a dynamic conductor, a brilliant mind. He meant a lot to a lot of people, and I know he was a dear friend of yours. Can you tell us more about what he meant to you, and especially in those early years when you were on the up and up, and he was the music director at the WSO?
Well, it would be it's difficult
Yeah.
to express how much he meant to me, how much he'll always mean to me. Certainly, for those of us that were around Manitoba in those years where he was at the helm of the WSO, I mean, he was this force of nature. He was a guy that I was thinking about it recently, talking to someone else, and it's difficult to define because you don't meet people like him, where
Mm.
he managed to be both larger than life and completely down to earth at the same time. And yeah, I think that was an interesting time for Winnipeg. It's like after Winnipeg lost the Jets, I think he was the most famous person in Winnipeg, and
Hmm.
that's kind of something for the conductor of the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra to be so recognizable and so beloved by an entire city. The things he did artistically and in terms of shaping the future of the WSO, I think those have had impact through today and will always have an impact as long as the WSO is playing. His yeah. So I feel personally like I'm just very lucky because I got sort of more of him than a lot of other people. But I think that everyone who interacted with him felt that they were valued and they got a piece of what he had to offer. I mean, certainly as a young person, so many of my first opportunities to play major repertoire, were with him during his time with the WSO, and then later on, he gave me these wonderful chances to, my UK debut was with him,
Hmm.
and in major orchestras in the United States and abroad. And it just, he never treated me like sort of this junior, apprentice type. So that as our lives developed, the friendship developed very naturally, and
Mm.
we just had a great time together. So that's quite apart from the music. It's like even if you were just a terrible musician, I still would have wanted every opportunity to work with him, just to hang out with the guy. He was so interesting and so brilliant and so funny. But yeah, really an irreplaceable man.
Yeah, you say it so well there. We had him in the studio a number of times, and one of my favorites was just how he had this infectious energy that you couldn't get him out of the studio in the best way. And it was one of those where I'd put music to air and just have the opportunity to continue to chat with him and just to continue to hear more about his thoughts on music. It's just such a force, as I say, and as he's become known as. I was thinking back to those '90s days, which were early days for me. I was a kid, but I remember going to the WSO. And did you play the Beethoven Violin Concerto with Bramwell Tovey on the podium back in the '90s? Did that
I did.
happen?
Yes, that that did
Did that
happen.
happen? Okay, good, because it was
Did
kind of a
that
blurry
happen?
time for me. I just, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
What was your relationship with the piece back then?
Well, it's really difficult to those questions are hard.
Yeah. Yeah,
Let's see.
yeah.
What was your relationship with the piece back then? It's like, well, I think that I felt the same way about the piece then that I feel about it now, but I'm a different person now.
Mm,
It's funny those when you look back at anything in one's early life, it's like the emotions were very real. The thoughts were
mm,
very real. They were who you were at that point. And as an adult, there are things where you look back and you're like, wow, that was a funny way to look at the world. But with music, I think that it's an emotional language or a language of emotions, and whatever they elicit at that time in your life, that's because that's what it needs to be. And the message that I felt compelled to share when playing the piece when I was, say, you know 18, or I don't know
mhm,
how old I was when I played it here. um, it was surely a different message because it had a different messenger. I've changed a lot, but I can't say that It's it's not one of those pieces where I feel looking back like, oh my goodness, what was I doing playing
Right.
that piece? It meant it always meant a lot to me. I think that the Beethoven concerto, that's like one of the reasons that you play the violin. That's one of the things that makes you fall in love with playing the violin.
Yeah, it's one of those pieces that has been with you throughout your career, and it was one of those that you played for a long time before recording it with the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic and Andrew Manzi. That disc came out in 2017, and just before that, you were actually in Winnipeg, and I was listening to that interview you gave in 2016, and you talked about how it was one of, I think you called it the greatest pieces of music in the repertoire, and how violinists are lucky to have it. But one of the things you mentioned, and I'm hoping you can unpack this a little bit more ahead of this weekend's performance, is you talked about how it's a piece of music that you need to let sit between performances. It's not one of those that you can toss off. And you don't toss anything off. You're James Ennis. You know what I mean? But like, just to use the crass term, but it's just one of those pieces that really needs to have moments between, almost to like recharge. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I think I remember what I was saying. It's funny when people are like, "Yeah, so I listened to this interview of
Yeah,
you
yeah,
and
right.
said
Yeah,
such
yeah,
and
yeah.
such," and it's like, "Uh-oh, what did I
Uh-oh.
say?" But no, I think that the piece is kind of an event. It's
Yeah.
a big piece on a big scale that ideally has a pretty big impact.
Mm,
And I think that because of that, I mean, for it to properly speak to an audience, I think the player has to be 100% engaged. It has to be something as the player that you want to do. You need to do that right now. That's
mhm,
really important to you. Sharing that story, whatever that may be. And I think what I was getting at then, and I still feel now, is it's the sort of thing, if you just played it week after week after week after week, it would be very difficult for it to be the same occasion for you as it
mm,
is for the listener. And that becomes a little bit unfair. I think we've all been to performances where we felt a little bit let down because it doesn't seem to mean as much to the person for whom it should mean the absolute most. So yeah, that's it. That's one of the things about that piece, that as much as I love to play it, and as much as I do play it, I try not to play it week after week after
right.
week. I'll be playing it next week in Japan, so I guess I do have 2 weeks in a row of it. But that will be nice. I think
Yeah.
that's kind of about right. If I can do a couple of weeks of it and really kind of live in that world for a little bit, that's great.
One other thing I want to ask you about this particular piece of music is about the cadenzas that you'll be performing, because those, of course, Beethoven left blank for the soloist to do their thing, as Franz Clement would have done as the premier of the work, or Joseph Joachim, the player credited with sort of reviving interest in the concerto. What's your plan for Saturday? Will it be the Chrysler cadenzas as you did on the recording I mentioned earlier, or something
Yeah,
else?
I think it will be. That reminds me, though, I have promised someone at some point to play this other set of cadenzas, but not this weekend.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Maybe in Japan. Yeah.
Yeah, I really do love those Chrysler cadenzas for the outer movements. I think that the little cadenza connecting the second to the third movement, that is a little bit more. I think that sort of happens as the moment strikes you. But
Mhm.
I can't help but feel that those cadenzas that Chrysler wrote, if Beethoven had heard them, he would have been like, "Oh, I should have thought of that."
And so we're going to be lucky to hear those. I mean, they are so great. Like you say, they're real tricky little things, but just so impressive and so lovely, and wait, calls back material. Anyway, so this your first time performing with the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra under the direction of current maestro Daniel Reiskin. As you mentioned earlier, what a way to kick off this milestone anniversary year for the WSO. If that wasn't enough, which it shouldn't be, because I don't think you can have too much James Ennis playing violin in your life. You also performed with the Winnipeg Chamber Music Society the night before on Friday the 16th. Just briefly, you must be so looking forward to performing alongside Gwen Hobig, Carl Stobie, Yuri Hooker, David Morose in just this wonderful chamber music setting.
Well, absolutely. I mean, those are some of my absolute favorite people, and yeah, that was sort of how this came about. It was Carl and David saying, "Hey, so you're coming to town. Want to have some fun?" And I was like, "Of course I do." I've been lucky to see Carl a little bit recently, but I haven't seen these friends for
Mm.
years, and so it's going to be great, and it's going to be wonderful to make music, and it's also just a really nice excuse to spend a little bit of extra time together. Um, Oh yeah, that's going to be really, really great fun.
Yeah, there's that age-old adage of chamber music is music made amongst friends, and that's exactly what's happening on Friday night. I do have one more question about the show. I'm not going to get into the music or anything like that, but I see that Carl is on the viola, but I know you two are a gifted violist. Was there any back and forth on that in terms of who would be taking the viola part in this music? I was really curious about that.
I think that the only back and forth on it was me saying that I don't want to bring my double case. So,
Decision
sorry,
made.
Carl. I'm afraid it's going to be you. I do love playing viola, but I don't love traveling with the monster double case. So yeah, that was an easy decision, at
Uh,
least for
total, Totally fair. And well, James Ennis, we're just so lucky to have you back in Winnipeg. It's just been a real pleasure to reconnect with you, and so thrilled that you're coming back to town. Safe travels to Winnipeg, and see
Thank
you
you.
soon.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks a lot.